meeting for Thursday, February 10th, 2022, beginning at 7:01 p.m. We'll start with the roll call. Councilmember David Hooverman.
Present.
Councilmember Tom Keegan.
Here.
Councilmember John Kites.
Here.
Councilmember Jen McMurray.
Here.
Councilmember Nora Najelski-Eichner.
Here.
And Councilmember Diana Revolus.
Here.
And Greg Burnett. So we have a quorum. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, which is public participation. We did not receive any emails prior to the meeting for tonight's Finance and Claims Committee meeting. Andrew, does anyone have their hand raised that wishes to speak?
No hands raised at the moment.
Okay, with that, we will move on and close public participation and move on to item 4, which is approval of the minutes of the following Finance Committee meetings. The first one we'll address is the regular meeting dated January 13th. And on the agenda, that date should be January 13th, 2022. It currently shows 2021. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from January 13th? Yes, I see Councilmember Jen McMurray. Thank you. Do we have any additions or deletions or corrections? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of approval of the minutes as presented, show by raise of hand. Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you. And for the minutes, I just also want to mention that we have on the call Councilperson Barbara Smith and Nicole Ayers and Heidi Alterman, and also Mayor Harry Riley. Moving on to the next item, which is the minutes from the January 20th special meeting. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes? Councilmember David Hooverman, thank you. Any additions, deletions, or corrections to those minutes? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor of approval of the minutes from the special meeting, show by raise of hand. All those opposed, any abstentions? We have one abstention, Councilmember John Kites. Thank you. Moving on to items 5, 6, and 7, which is the Claims Committee report, as well as the tax collection narrative and monthly tax collectors report. And we have our tax collector, Lisa B, with us. Thank you, Lisa. The floor is yours. And I'll bring up the narrative.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening. I would like to start with the claims because we do in fact have several special requests that are requiring your vote and your approval due to the dollar amount in excess of $10,000. One is what we would call a simple overpayment, a duplicate payment that was made on a real estate parcel in the amount of $40,000 and change. The other one is an overpayment of the Pepperidge Farm account on Westport Avenue. This was the result of a stipulated judgment in court. That's the page right there. The refund amount is in excess of $36,000. This was a case where our assessor and our corporation counsel reached a settlement with the taxpayer who had appealed their property assessment, and what they call an I&E, income and expense penalty, was removed as part of the court negotiation. As I understand it, this property was a fairly unique property, not only owner occupied, but actually built to suit a specific unique purpose. and an income and expense report for purposes of assessment would not be useful in this case. So there was no reason to impose a penalty for something that they really shouldn't have had to file to begin with. So they removed that penalty, and the taxpayer had already paid the bill. And so that's why we are required to refund their money at this time. So we would need the committee to vote on those two.
Thank you, Lisa. So, do we have a motion to approve the Claims Committee report review dated February 10th, 2022? Councilmember Jen McMurray. Thank you, Jen. All those in favor show, do we have any question? Okay, seeing, hearing none. All those in favor show by a sign of raising your hand. All those opposed have the same right. It's unanimous. Thank you. So we will move this forward to the full council for approval at the next council meeting, which will be Tuesday, February 22nd.
Thank you. In terms of the narrative and the monthly spreadsheet, we are actually, as of the end of January, we had achieved a 92.05% collection rate, which is right about where we need to be. We're a little bit ahead of where we were last year at the end of January. We won't really know where we fully stand until the end of February, because the last day to pay was February 1st, and there was quite a bit that came at the very end of the collection cycle that first week of February. We're up to date with our posting. The collection went very well. There were no issues. We are now preparing to issue delinquent notices. For those that are not familiar with the term is actually called a demand for payment. It's a statutory term. We are required to make demand for payment under state law before we can proceed with any other type of enforcement. And so our delinquent notices are called demand for payment. We explain that on the notice, that it's not intended to imply rudeness to the taxpayer in any way. But those should be going out later this month. We will usually file our lien continuing certificates by the middle of the month of March. If all goes well, that's what we will do again this year, and then proceed to march toward the conclusion of our fiscal year on June 30th. In the meantime, we did issue a series of what we call alias tax warrants to our state marshals for collection. They've been doing very well. We issued them at the beginning of January, and we've already collected about $25,000 on those. We are going to be issuing some more. You may hear from some of your constituents who were served by the marshals, but this is an end result of a long process, including some of those, what I call demand for payments, that went unfulfilled. And so we work with the marshals. We also work with our health department, because in Norwalk, you are not able to renew your health license if you have back taxes that are more than a year old. So we're working with our sanitarians and our health department on trying to help us collect some of those outstanding amounts. And I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have about the collection cycle or about the enforcement activities.
Okay, seeing, hearing none. As we look at the current tax collection rate, and we're heading into the couple of months, we'll be into the fourth quarter of the fiscal year. What's your feelings as it relates to, are we on track to come in at our high 90%?
I think we're on track. We'll know more at the end of February, but things have been going fairly well. There were no major issues. I'm always trying to keep that collection rate high for the sake of the Board of Estimate and Taxation, because it starts to sound like a broken record, but it's really true. If we can keep the current collection rate high, it enables the Board of Estimate to set a lower mill rate because there's less of an allowance for uncollectible taxes. Because we know when we have a $370 million levy and 26,000 parcels of real estate and 78,000 motor vehicles, we know not everybody is going to pay on time. But if we are able to keep the collection rate high through diligent, progressive enforcement activity, it enables them to make less of an allowance for uncollectible. So the difference between a 98% collection rate and a 98.9 or 99% collection rate is a couple of mils. And that makes a difference to people. And we feel that that's tax relief for everybody who gets a bill from us, every taxpayer, whether it's a motor vehicle bill or a real estate bill. If that mill rate is lower, it enables that person to feel a certain amount of relief. And that is the driving force behind all of our activity. All of the efficiencies that we try to build into it, and the fact that we try to be diligent and persistent about enforcement. So we look to you, we look to the policymakers to stand behind us when we take these actions, and you have been generous in doing so, whether it's the tax sale or motor vehicle issues or whatever. And we hope that we can continue to count on that support, because if we don't have that, then we don't meet our budgeted collection rates. But it's a team effort with all of us being on the same page, I feel.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Any other comments or questions related to the tax narrative or tax collectors report? Okay, great. Well, thank you, Lisa. We appreciate it. And we'll see you next month
Thank you very much.
with hopefully more good news.
We'll see you next month with more good news. Absolutely. Stay well.
Moving on to item 8 on the agenda, which is to receive the Oak Hills Authority monthly financial statement for December 2021. And I see that we have on the call Carl Dickens from the Oak Hills Park Authority. Carl, are you delivering the report this month?
I am, because our chairman, Mr. De Palma, is in Tampa, Florida right now, supposedly on business. So,
all right, let me share what was submitted.
you can, Craig, you can kind of stop right there. This is what I'm going to speak to.
Great, okay,
I'm
thank
not
you.
going to bore everybody to death by going through 4 hours of numbers. So anyway, a couple of items up front. One thing that is not on here, as we all know, the weather has been trending up. It was nice today. Could be nice Saturday, even nicer. And then Sunday, get our winter coats back out, I guess, as it falls. But with that, we will be open on Saturday. The tee sheet is almost full. So we will have people playing golf at the course, excuse me, this coming Saturday. And good evening to everybody. I'm sorry for that. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carl Dickens, and I'm the vice chair. And I've been on the commission now for, I think this is going into my 5th year, and I was chairman for 2 years. So, because there's a lot of new faces on this call tonight. So that's interesting and good to see. So jumping into this, we won't take very long, because we have actually good news. The first part there, you see the operation updates. We're obtaining all the necessary permits that we've been working on for months now, and for the certificate of occupancy for the clubhouse being really the restaurant at Oak Hills. I spoke with Don today. We have been cleared with the little issue we had with the bar, and that's all been signed off on. And now we're just waiting to get the certificate, which should be coming up hopefully maybe this week, and that'll put all of the certificates that we've had to have for the city and get signed off on to bed, and that'll be done. That being said, what we're looking at right now, we're working hard toward, is a soft opening around the 1st of March. That being, we do basically a dry run where we will open the restaurant for business. We will have an invited guest, of which this group, of course, will be invited. and the press and a few other people from the golf course that, regular players and that sort of thing, to do a dry run, and also the staff and all of that. So hopefully that date will hold true. I know we've had other dates and other things have come up, and it's been a real educational process to go through. So that's the good news from that standpoint about that. We did, because we had such a good year and something we've been wanting to do for 10, 15, 20 years probably, is to have continuous cart paths at the course, because we have lost money on days when it's really rainy, or it's been raining for 2 days, 3 days in the paths that the area of the golf course where it's not been paved. We couldn't let golf carts out, which we rent because of the mud and that sort of thing. Well, that is now all finished. So if you haven't been to the golf course for a long time, when we open for the season and the carts are released, we are not going to release carts on Saturday. You'll be able to see the golf paths that are now continuous. So that changes a big thing for the course, because a lot of money that we lose because of bad weather, that'll go away. So we'll be able to get some more. We had one small section that you see there on the 7th hole will be completed as soon as the golf course opens for the season and we can get the heavy duty trucks in and that sort of thing. There was only one way really to get in and gain access to the course to do all of the paving that needed to be done. And unfortunately, it was up and around the 7th hole. And then along came the latest storm we had, which, the storm of the century with all the rain, and we had problems in front of the green coming up to it. But that'll all be taken care of. So that'll help us there tremendously, and really set us aside from a lot of public courses, and will help with the demand that we currently have and continues, which is really good. The financial highlights that we're talking about right now, this is always good news to anybody that has to deal with money like all of us. Right now, the year-to-date net operating income is over budget by $114,000. And it's hard to believe that when we talked about COVID and COVID shut us down, which we thought would be a couple of weeks, and we opened up in the year of COVID, for that year, we had $2,380 in the bank. We've now got $529,000 in cash in the bank. So it's been productive over the last couple of years. And while COVID's not been good for a lot of people, and I don't make light of this, COVID's been good for the game of golf across the country. All golf courses have seen extra play, extra money, and that sort of thing, and people with a renewed passion for the game. Also, revenue was slightly over budget, mostly due to the strong play that we had in October. Remember, the weather was very good, and so we had a lot of people still playing golf. Expenses, 82,000 lower than the budget, mainly due to our cart fleet and the lease, which we reclassified as a capital lease. And in effect, that was a $55,000 reduction for us on year-to-date expenses. The advisory board made nearly 80,000 in repayments so far to the city on us paying our bill back during the fiscal year to date, including the annual 1% of gross revenue payment, which is approximately $22,000. So for those of you who don't know what that is, there was an agreement of payback that was reached between Oak Hills and the city. And then it kicked in the second year of that agreement. Once we started paying it back, there was a 1% gross revenue payment, gross revenue being on a round of play golf actually paid for. And we're in the process of extending our line of credit at Norwalk Bank and Trust, which we always carried and have carried for $250,000. That's kind of like a little dangerous thing you have, but we had to have it because we didn't have the money, and because of the seasonality of golf, we always had to borrow money about this time of year, sometimes a little earlier in the end of the year that ended, in order to pay staff and do some things we had to do. Well, we haven't had to do that. So we have the line of credit, but we're not going to use it, and we don't need to use it this year. once we're within a month and a half to opening back up and generating revenue, we don't have to do any of that. So that's all good news. Mark is working now on, along with Joanne Drosco, who is the treasurer, the full high-level budget, which is being worked on, and we should have that ready pretty soon. Henry's probably glad to hear that. So that'll be taken care of. As of today, we have sold 48 season passes for a total of, I think it's around $106,000. We're going to limit that to 50. So if you want to buy a season pass, we got 2 spots to it. And then we're going to cut that because of some of the issues that we had last year of tee times and that sort of thing. But a quick sidebar comment on this. I know there were some questions about whether we did season passes this year or not. People started calling us and wanting to buy them before we made that decision. And almost instantly when the decision was made, oh, sure, there's a big demand for this to do it, they started flying out the door. So people like the idea of the seasonal pass. Total rounds for calendar year 2021, 48,746. And that's when I first got involved with the board, we were at a low of around 31,000 rounds. So that is very good news. And we're hoping that out of 48,746 people that come and play golf, they all don't boot scoot right after they get done playing, or even when they're not playing, they come to the restaurant and spend money at the restaurant. And that starts to become a moneymaker and generator of cash. So that's all good. And let's see. So since July of 2020, Mark has sent me a note that says we have paid back our debt to the city. The total debt paid since then is about 100 toward the debt is $170,000. And that's great because it wasn't too long ago to where we were having to say checks in the mail. But that has all been cleared up. And that's really about it. I mean, I don't want to bore you with anything else about numbers and this and that, but right now I'd have to say thumbs are up.
Thank you, Carl.
You're welcome.
Any questions for Oak Hills? I did have one question. You mentioned you in the process of increasing your line of credit. That currently it's at 100,000. Is that correct?
No, we've always had, it's been a little over $200,000, two and a quarter, somewhere in there, that we've always had to take out for emergency purposes. And as I said, to keep it open and pay the staff, because there are paid staff members that work year round. And once we close, and this year we closed officially on January 7th, we had enough money in the bank to still pay our employees and to pay our bills and our electric and our insurance and everything else without having to tap that line of credit. That line of credit becomes very dicey because if you borrow money, and since our budget years are set up the way they are, but if we borrowed tomorrow $200,000, took the whole line of credit because we needed it for something, that all has to be paid back by November 1st of this year to be eligible to have a line of credit for next year. So that's always been a race against the clock, but we're not having to worry about that right now.
Great, thank you. Yes, Nora.
Just one other quick question. So I appreciate the good news about the repayment to the city. Is there an estimated timeline for, is there a goal of a 10-year repayment in total or 15-year repayment in total? I just didn't have a sense of what the goal was there.
There never really was a date stuck in the ground back when this first started many years ago, as that it'll all be due and paid up by X. And if it's not, then there'll be a penalty or this or that. So it's keep paying until we pay it down or pay it off, or all of us are gone somewhere else.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
No, it's a good question.
Any other questions for Oak Hills? Okay.
You will be amazed when you see the inside of the restaurant. We spent a little over $50,000 redoing the whole look and feel.
Great. And what is that date again, Carl?
We're shooting for the 1st of March, but we'll let you guys know that as soon as we get a hard date, so that you can plan for it.
Great. Okay, very good. Thank you so much for the update. We'll see you next month with more good news.
Good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Moving on to item 9 on the agenda, which reads as follows. Authorize the mayor, Harry W. Rilling, to execute any and all documents necessary to upgrade WorldDocs software to SaaS cloud-based solution, recurring costs $8,571, one-time migration fee of $1,920. Do we have a motion on this item? Councilperson Diana Revelous, thank you. And I believe we have Joyce Liu from IT along with Darren Callahan from our corporate counsel's office to discuss this item. So I don't know who's kicking it off, Darren or Joyce?
I'll start.
Joyce. Okay, great.
Good evening, everyone. So the WorldDocs is a contract management software that currently used by our corporate counsel since 2014. Right now, it is on-premise solution that is hosted by, on our network by IT. So this agenda item is requesting to upgrade the existing on-premise WorldDocs software to the WorldDocs GX4 cloud solution. The reason we're upgrading the software is that it's to giving the accessibility for the law staff to be able to access the contract from office, home, or courtroom without the limitation to be able to access through city's network. The annual software cost is $8,571, and that is including the 11 license for the current staff, plus the cloud storage. So there is also a one-time cost for the data migration and the staff training for the $1,920. So currently, this is going to coming out from IT's operating budget on the object 5742. That is our software account. So I'm joined here with Darren Callahan, and if you guys have any question, we are here happy to answer.
Yeah, Darren, just to kind of put some bookends on what Joyce was presenting. Again, it's our document management system, and going from the on-site software to cloud-based software presented a unique opportunity to address some of the existing contractual obligations with the vendor, and specifically in the area of data security and data breach. So, and this is a program that Mr. Dashowitz was responsible for rolling out to really secure our data, how we handle data, and reduce risk and liability. So I worked very closely, as I do on all the software solution packages that we get from our vendors now, to review over from an IT perspective what we can do from a contractual standpoint. We have a data writer that we work from and tailor to the specific vendor that essentially sets forth our standards for data protection and security, and provides for indemnification and insurance in the event of a data breach. So we were able to, it took quite a bit of negotiation. Actually, we ultimately ended up negotiating directly with the president of the company. But long story short is in going from the existing software to the cloud-based solution, we were able to tag on our data writer, significantly reducing exposure to the city for data security and cyber risk in doing so. So it's a very positive result. And I asked Joyce to put this on the agenda because part and parcel of doing that is we're going to enter into an addendum to our current contract, which will be the data security rider. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Councilmember Tom Keegan.
Out of curiosity, Darren or Joyce, this is obviously replacing something that already exists, right?
It's like an upgrade.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the difference in the cost of the previous software versus this?
The difference between the current software is when we move to the cloud, there's a cloud storage access. That is around $2,000 for the 150 gigabyte storage. Also, there is kind of annual subscription, $1,265, and there's also a one-time onboarding fee to the cloud is $400. So adding together the existing on-premise license is $5,016. So the additional one will be adding on will be $1,890 for the cloud storage and $1,265 for the upgrade and $400 for the onboarding fee.
Yeah, it also the upgrade from the existing software to the cloud-based solution is going to solve a logistical problem that we have with the system. So this is our document management system. So every email that comes into the law department goes out of the law department. Every Word document that's prepared, whether it's a contract or a pleading, any document is managed in this system, and it's logged, it's stored, it gets a specialized identification number, and so that it could be recalled the same way a physical file can, but it's a virtual file that can be accessed from anywhere in which you have an internet connection. But the problem that we discovered is that there had always existed a need to access the data management system remotely, but we didn't have that capability for a long time. When COVID hit, we started integrating a remote access to our network. And when that opened up a lot of opportunity to better utilize the software. But what quickly became clear is that there was a lag, a connectivity issue with the on-site software accessing it through the VPN. And the solution was to go to the cloud because it doesn't have to be routed through the network. It goes directly to the cloud. Now, I really couldn't explain any greater detail than that because I've now exhausted my knowledge of technology. But what I could tell you is it's important for us because, now when we need to work at night from home, we can turn on our computer and access our doc management system much more efficiently. When we need to work on weekends, we can do the same. When we're in the courthouse, God willing, will be soon open back up. We'll be able to access it in real time, on premise. So it provides a huge value to the law department as far as efficiencies and resources go.
One of the benefits of moving to the cloud is we used to host the server and host the indexing server just for the software itself. By moving to the cloud, we can retire those two servers. And that's totally managed by the cloud provider they are having.
Remember, David Hooverman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Burnett. A couple of questions in here. It's it says software first year, 8,296. That's a one-time cost, or that's a yearly cost on rental of the software?
That will be the annual cost.
That's the annual cost. So
Yeah.
when it says first year, that sort of says to me, are there increases over time? And how long is this this agreement, this contract for?
The software itself costs about $5,016. That, well, since 2014, that's the same price we are paying. So the difference that going forward probably will be the storage space that we are going to use for the documents. The more document we store in the cloud, we probably will see a little bit increase from year to year. But they also listing on the contract that they are listing, every like 100 gigabytes of data, they are charging 150 each year. So they also have a price tag, based on how much data we are going to store.
And how much data are we going to be storing based on what we have right now in the servers? Because you're migrating everything from the current local servers to the cloud. Do we know what that?
Yes, right now they are charging us based on what our current usage is $157.50 per month. But this
Represents how much, how big, how many gigabytes of storage do we take up right now?
150 gigabyte right now.
Well, right now we're at 150 gigs. Okay.
Yes.
So this is a 1-year agreement that we're looking at. I'm confused.
No, this is software that was instituted long overdue, apparently, when Corporation Counsel Coppola onboarded with the city, I guess now 8 or 9 years ago. Apparently the city didn't have document management software, which is foundational for operational law firms. So this will be, unless we migrate to another document management system in the future, because of inadequacies with the system. They don't exist now, but it would continue. It's really no different than our physical file management system, other than it's virtualized. It's a repository for organizing our documents.
Okay, so the recurring cost is around $8,500 a year.
Yes.
And we don't know over time when. This is what I'm trying to drive at. Every year, are we going to be faced with this contract, or do we have multiple years that we are locked in at $8,500 a year with continuing cost of increased storage?
Well, so the annual fee, I don't have in front of me, but generally how these things work is you get a flat annual fee for a period of time, 3 years, and then there's however they do it, 5% increase.
Or that's what I'm asking.
but
What is that? That's what I'm curious about, so that we have an idea of what how this increases over time. That was all.
Yeah, based on the agreement, they are charging every gigabyte of data where storage additional on top of that is 15 cents. So it's really it's not much for per gigabyte. So it really depends how many of a document we store on that. But based on our current usage, that is a little bit under 150 gigabytes.
Right, we're voting on a recurring cost. I'm just trying to drive at how long before we vote again on this recurring cost. Is that making sense? I'm sorry if it's not clear.
Yeah, I'm just trying to pull the
3-year contract, 2-year contract. This comes back again. It's re-up. That's all. That's what I'm trying to drive at.
Just trying to pull it up.
Well, and David, maybe one way to think about it is that if they've been using this system for 8 or 9 years and they've accumulated 150 gigs in 8 or 9 years, then, can we take an estimate of approximately how much additional they add per year? I mean, that would suggest that they add, 15 gigs, give or take a year. And at Joyce, what did you say, 50 cents a gig?
15 cents,
15 cents a gig, 1.5.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
probably not a lot then in terms of additional increase.
right. So even if we use of next year, it's 100 gigabyte, it's $150, just $150 on top of the annual contract. So even if we double the size of what the document we have right now, it's still going to be just a slightly difference, like $100 to $150 each year.
All right, thank you.
Okay, any additional questions on this item? Okay, hearing, seeing none. All those in favor of moving forward with this authorization for the software upgrade, show by the sign of aye.
Yes.
And all those opposed have the same right. Any abstention? Hello? Any? I think it's all yes. So this item will move forward to the full council for review and approval on Tuesday, February 22nd. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Moving on to item 10 in the on the agenda, which is the Chief Financial Officer's presentation of the overall city operating budget. We received the initial review of the budget during a special meeting on Tuesday, February. I think getting my dates mixed up. It was on Tuesday of this week. I believe it was the 8th. And we asked our Chief Financial Officer, Henry Dakowitz, to come to the Finance and Claims Committee meeting to again cover the recommended operating budget presentation, as well as to allow members of the Finance Committee to address any questions now that they've had a chance to review the budget that was presented on Tuesday, and we'll move forward from this point. So I'll turn the floor over to Henry for the presentation.
Thank you, Greg. I think that the mayor might want to have some remarks before I start.
Okay, yes, I'm sorry. Mayor Rilling is on the call. So if maybe you want to, I don't know if you want to stop sharing. And Mayor Rilling, do you have any comments you'd like to make before we start?
No, thank you. This is a budget that we tried to put together. It's very challenging, especially this year. And I think everybody understands that, we have an obligation to keep our taxes as low as possible, but still understand that we have students in our school system that we need to fund and educate, because that's really what a community is all about. And I want to commend Henry, and I don't think Tom Ellis is on the line here, but Tom, is that Tom?
I am.
Okay, thank you, Tom, for working really hard to put together a budget that we think is fair at this point in time. And we're working with the Board of Education to understand what their needs are. As you know, we're going to have a workshop in the next, I think, Tuesday afternoon to go over and listen to the Board of Education so we can adjust anything we feel we need to adjust and make the good decisions. When we're trying to put together a budget, it's easy to say, okay, let's give X number of dollars to this group, X number of dollars to that group. But this year and last year has proven that we have to be prepared to make the tough decisions. We have to be prepared to understand that, like I mentioned before, we have people who have lost jobs, lost income, can't afford to pay their basic needs, pay for their basic needs. Yet we also have students that during the online learning or the distance learning really didn't progress as much as we hoped they would. So this is a challenging time, not only for Norwalk, but every community is faced with the same decisions, the same challenges in being fair and equitable. And I look for comments from your finance committee. I look for comments from other members of the council, other members of the BET to give us your thoughts and tell us what you think is more important or most important at this point in time. And together, I think we can move forward. It's all about working together and putting together what we believe is a good, strong budget, but one that is fair and equitable to everyone. Budgeting is not an exact science. You do the best you can. You put together what you think your expenditures are going to be. You try to count your revenue stream, but things change during the year as well. So again, kudos to Henry, to Tom, to Chitsime for the hard work that they've done in trying to craft a budget that we think we can live with, and we'll move forward and see where we go from here. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Rilling. And for the minutes, want to reflect that Council President Tom Livingston has joined the meeting. So over to you, Henry.
Thank you. I don't want to take up more time than I need to. Here's the table of contents. We're going to talk a little about the budget process, economics, what the recommended operating budget is, Board of Education and the efficiency study, the recommended operating budget by city department, talk a little bit about our unrestricted unassigned fund balance known as the rainy day fund, the translation of all those numbers into a tax levy and mill rate, and a conclusion. Budget director sends pro forma budgets to each department in October. The CFO and the budget director review the requested budget from all the departments through the month of December and early January. Monday of this week, the CFO and mayor recommended operating budget is presented. Finance committee public hearing is next week, February 17th. Common Council sets the budget cap on the 22nd. And then the BET meetings with each of the departments from March 2nd to March 21, 3 weeks to review what they requested and what they've received or recommended. Public hearing on the 23rd, and the BET then forwards the tentative budget to the Common Council on the 29th. The council sets the final cap. Right now, it's established at April 12th. Legally, it must occur before April 19th. And then the BET sets the final budget and the tax levy on May 2nd. Laws of economics as they apply to budgeting. I've done this in prior years. First, economics is about making choices and trade-offs. It's about setting priorities and making decisions, knowing there are just not enough resources to obtain everything you wish and all of the requests. The law of diminishing returns says if we keep increasing our spending on an item, the amount of benefit we get for each additional expenditure becomes smaller and smaller. And that's something to take into account as we allocate and prioritize these expenditures. I've been showing this for a number of years as well. Here's the city local expenditures excluding the Public School Board of Ed. It went from 160.6. The current year is 189.2, and we're recommending 196. In the middle of the page, the Schools Board of Ed has gone from 166 million to 208 this year with a recommendation to 216. However, the city provides services and spends money on behalf of the schools. We don't charge them, and it's buried within our accounts. So to properly account for who is getting the benefit of the expenditures, we take the city expenditures and we reduce the in-kind services we perform for the Board of Ed. It used to be 10.3 million. It's now rising to 14 million. Additionally, we pay the debt service for all of the long-term debt, the bonds that are outstanding. But we're very able to separate the debt for the Board of Ed construction projects and for the city. And the debt service on the Board of Ed side has risen from 14.4 million to 15.3. So in sum, 29.4 million that is buried in the city budget is not for the city benefit. We subtract that to show that the city is really benefiting $166.8 million. Conversely, and this is not controversial, the in-kind services are prepared by our controller based on data from both the city and the Board of Ed, and it's filed with the State Board of Education in Hartford. On the school side, we have to add back those expenses. They're getting that benefit. If they didn't get those services from us, they would have to spend money to get those services from someone else. So we add the 29 million to the recommended 216, and that would be 245 million. So really, the city is getting 167 million, and the Board of Ed is getting 246. The total is 412 million, and this has been pretty consistent for the last 8 years. The city expenditures is about 40% of the total, and the Board of Ed expenditures is about 60%. Another way of looking at this is understanding all the monies that the Board of Ed spends. So Chisholm Lamb, our controller, put this together from our consolidated annual financial reports. Those are the 150, 200-page reports, which include our certified financial statements. So General Fund 11 is where most expenses from the local taxes are spent. So the Board of Ed spent 188.7 in 19, 198.1 in 20, and 204.4 in 21. That 204 is 4 million less than their total budget of 208. The Board of Ed, legally, if they run a surplus, they generally request up to 2% of their total budget as surplus and ask for it to be rolled over. It just so happens their budget was 208, 2% is 4 million. So they spent 204 million and requested the additional 4 million from the city as a rollover into our current year, fiscal year 22. In addition, there's a grant fund that the Board of Education controls, and they spent 21 million in 19, 24 million in 20, and 32 million last year. This is great. It's additional money we can spend, but many people forget about this, and the Board of Ed has additional resources to spend every year. There's a school lunch fund. This past year was 55.9 million. Other Board of Ed special revenues, $1 million. Student activity funds, 686,000. When you add it all up, that subtotal is 244 million. State of Connecticut pays pension and OPEB expenses for the Connecticut teachers' retirement system. So if we're running a school, we have to have these expenditures, and they're not accounted for anywhere. So there's another 29.8 million spent on behalf of the school system. In kind, the numbers that we said before that the city pays, 11.6, and the debt service was 13.4. When you add it all up, the local taxes that they spent was 204 million, but they really spent 299 million for the whole year. It's an additional, it had been 85 going up to 95 million. So in addition to whatever we give them on the local level, they have another 46% that they spend money on. So that should just be included when anybody considers how much money is being spent for the school children. We had, in the last 2 years, we've had COVA and ARPA reimbursements. I wanted to summarize them in one chart. This was as of May, earlier in 2021. So FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Association, part of Homeland Security, and it's reimbursements of costs for emergencies. just like Hurricane Sandy. In this case, this was COVID. We got reimbursed 100% of eligible COVID expenses. The city got 1.7 million. Board of Ed did not get anything on that score. CRF is the State of Connecticut Coronavirus Relief Fund. These are federal funds that are channeled through the state of Connecticut and then passed on to us, local budgets, as reimbursements for expenses. So we had 610,000 on the first round, 1.1 million afterwards. Police got 114,000, health got 12. The city got 1.9 million, and the Board of Ed got 7.2 million, excuse me. So we have a total of 9 million from the state's Corona Relief Fund. Office of Early Childhood, the Board of Ed, the schools got an additional $452,000. The ESSER grant is a federal grant, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. It helps to safely open and sustain the safe operation of schools. ESSER 1, the first round, the schools got $11 million. ESSER 2 was another 2.1 million. ESSER 3, the Board of Ed calls ESSER 3, but it's really part of the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act, another 24.8. So they count that as 37.9 million in their ESSER grants. Secretary of State and CTCL, that's the Center for Technology and Civil Life, Mark Zuckerberg, included funding in there. $127,000 went to our registrar. Connecticut Secretary of State paid $75,000. Zuckerberg paid $51,000. This is money to register for voting technology. And here is the ARPA funds, as I said, the American Rescue Plan Act, more money to help cities and school districts. Nationally, the federal government gave money to cities, and as a city, we were given 22.1 million. They also give money to counties. Connecticut said, we don't have county governments anymore. So the federal government gave the county money to the state, and the state redistributed it to the cities based on population. We got 17.2 million. And that is the 39.3 million that we get in ARPA. For convenience, I put all the ARPA monies in one line on the bottom. So 24.8 million for the schools, 39.3 for the city, a total of 64 million, and a total of 88.6 in total for the city and the schools. We really got a lot of funds that will help us in achieving our goals. Let's talk about the City of Norwalk ARPA funds, $39 million. Half the funds were received last spring in May. We expect to receive the second half around the end of our budget cycle this year in April or May. One half, about $20 million, was designated to reduce general tax increases to taxpayers, both in fiscal year 22 last year, this year that we're in now, and in the upcoming fiscal 23. The way we did it is last year, to close the gap, to have almost a flat tax increase, we used $13 million. We thought this year, in a way to moderate the taxes, but not fully, we would use half as much, 7 million. However, if we run surpluses in our budgets in fiscal year 22 and 23, we may be able to use those surpluses to fill the gap. And then that would free up some more of this 20 million to be used for ARPA projects. $12 to $15 million has been targeted for flood mitigation projects. After offsetting tax increases, I view this as having the highest return on investment. It improves the quality of life throughout the city, as well as increasing the values of properties throughout Norwalk. Other designations for these monies include community services led by Lamont Daniels, working with the Norwalk nonprofits, economic and community development led by Jessica Vasovich. As you read in the story on Monday in the Norwalk Hour, we've dedicated $6.7 million for environment and sustainability. And we're also looking at high-speed fiber optic cabling for the city. Again, looking at one-time investments we may not have had the funds for historically, but with these funds from the government to utilize them to better the entire city. As we've talked about historically, there are certain structural challenges in Connecticut in establishing budgets for the Norwalk Public Schools. The first is Connecticut state law prohibits a city government like us from reducing a school budget below the prior year total. That's handcuffing us and not right-sizing the budget to circumstances. Secondly, the mayor, the Board of Estimate and Taxation, and Common Council are only allowed to establish an upper limit ceiling on NPS expenditures by the local amount of taxes that are granted to the schools. The public schools set the priorities and allocate the resources, and they're only subject to Board of Education approval. The good news is that the Public Schools Board of Education and the City of Norwalk entered into a joint agreement with Evergreen Technologies for an efficiency study. The study scope covered operations of both the schools and the city. Study commenced in the fall of 21, September, October-ish. They reviewed a large number of documents. They interviewed numerous employees, starting with the mayor and superintendent, working down to chiefs, department heads, staffers. They spent significant time on site for a more complete understanding. The interim reports have been communicated verbally to senior execs, and they tell me that the final report with findings, conclusions, and recommendations is targeted for release in late March, which is nice because it's before the final tax levy is set. Bottom line for this year, we recommend $216.3 million for the Public Schools Board of Education, which represents an increase of $7.8 million or 3.75% over last year's approved $208.4 million. On the city side, we're recommending $196.2 million. It is an increase of $7 million or 3.69% over last year's approved budget of $189.2 million. And remember, this 216 does not include the 30 million of in-kind expenses that the city is paying for, and the 196 does include the 30 million. So one way of looking at this is Board of Ed is getting 246 million and the city is getting 166 million. Here's a review at a very high level, department by department. Here was the approved amount last year, the recommended for this year, and the amount of change in dollars and in percentage. When I review an analysis like that, I want to see especially the items that have increased significantly. And the largest is my own finance department, going from 7.3 to 8.4 million, an increase of 115 million, of 15.8%. Let me explain what those changes are for. Okay. There are a number of departments that report up to me. The tax assessor is one. We are planning on the next 5-year revaluation in October of 2023. It's beyond the fiscal year 23 budget, which runs from July 1st, 22 to June 30, 23. However, the assessor has to spend money in the fiscal year 23 budget in order to ensure that the revaluation goes smoothly. He has asked for an increase in other professional services for $650,000 to retain experts that help us in the reval. Additionally, we are the last of 169 cities in Connecticut that still use the assessment module of Munis. Munis is our main computer system. So we are migrating from Munis to QDS, Quality Data Systems. Quality Data Systems does the assessment module piece for more than half of the cities in Connecticut. So we are looking for 132,000 to assist in that migration, which we expect to occur by the end of this year, 2022. So the assessor asked for $782,000. The purchasing department, led by Sharon Connors, has done an amazing job. Sharon and her staff, is a team of 3. By using technology, most notably the Bonfire technology platform for purchasing and procurement, Sharon and her team have been able to triple the number of requests for qualifications and requests for proposals that they have handled over the 3-year period. And they've asked for another purchasing management, which we felt was appropriate. Additionally, Sharon is in charge of some centralized utility expenses, and the telephone expenses are going up by $45,000. So her total ask was $146,000, which we agreed to. The controller department, led by Chitsime Lamb, has done marvelously. Their primary duties are making sure payroll gets paid, making sure vendors get paid accurately and in a timely manner, and making sure all accounting entries are made reflecting all these transactions, and then summarizing that all into financial reports. As much as we've automated, we still have manual systems, and she has asked for $81,000 for data entry input operators to help allow our current staff to do more analytical performance and duties rather than just data input. The tax collector, Lisa Biagiarelli, is planning on yet another tax sale. Again, it will not be in next year's fiscal year ending June 30th, but probably in the fall, August, September, October timeframe of 2023. In order to successfully conduct that tax sale, she's looking for $67,000 in this current year budget. The IT department, everyone who looks at our IT department says, we're amazed at how much you do with your limited resources. You really should be doing more. You really need more resources. And we are adding $60,000 to that budget for an additional hire. Similarly, Tom Ellis has been with us for less than 3 months, actually less than 2.5 months. And we have in the budget $56,000 of an addition for the funding of a budget analyst. So that is the reason why the finance group is up 15.8%. When you break it down by the individual departments, it really is not unreasonable. The other very large increase is 9.6% for employee benefits. As you might imagine, the leading driver there is health insurance. And we have been told by our health insurance consultant to expect a 1.9 million increase to 18.2 million of 11.5%. As we've seen in prior years, the health insurance consultant usually starts off with a very high forecast, and month by month, as she gets better data, she lets us know. So we are hopeful that maybe that 11.5% will come down by the time we finalize the budget. But at this moment, it's 11.5%. There are other items in the employee benefits line. For example, the city's liability, auto, and property insurance is going up by $720,000. It happens to be 40% from last year. So that draws up the number a little bit. At the same time, workers' comp is going down by 5%. We also have OPEB, which is less than the 9.6%. So when you blend it all together, the 11.5% for the health insurance plus the other items blend into a 9.6% increase. The rest of the numbers seem pretty reasonable to me, not terribly high. I'll note that the police department, our largest department expense, went from 26.1 million to 26.6 million. That $500,000 increase is less than 2%. So I think most of the departments have cut out the fluff, but when they say they need resources to deliver the quality of services that are expected, we try to find those resources for them. City alone has gone from 189.2 to $196.2 million, an increase of about $7 million or 3.69%. I'd like to talk a little bit now about the rainy day balance. Now, a rainy day balance can't be assessed in isolation. you could have two different cities, two different sizes, and they shouldn't have the same rainy day fund. So we look at total general fund expenditures as a benchmark. So we've gone from 360.8 million, and we're looking at a recommended 23 of 412.4 million. Rainy day technically is our unrestricted, unassigned fund balance. At year end, it was 57.7. It went to 69.7, 58.4, 72.4 at the end of 21. And I'll explain why we look at it as 68.4 going forward. 2 years ago, we switched accounting auditing firms to Bloom Shapiro, now part of CLA, Clifton Larson Associates. And they explained that when we, in our budget cycle, identify an amount of money that we intend to draw down for the next year's budget, when they look at our June 30 financial statements, they take that amount of money and reduce the unrestricted unassigned fund balance. They say, you're planning on using it, that's assigned. So our total fund balance remains the same, but we have to take out the amount we're designating from unrestricted unassigned, and we shift it over to assigned. So on that basis, that was part of the reason the 69.7 went to 58.4. We had a very good year through COVID to 72.4 million. But this year in 22, we did not plan on taking any money from the rainy day fund because we had ARPA funds to bridge the gap. So therefore, the rainy day fund does not get reduced. And that is very helpful. It's a very important factor in our bond ratings. Remember, credit rating agencies are assessing the probability or the possibility that we might not make interest and principal payments to bondholders on time as we promise. When we have a healthy rainy day fund, they say, well, the risk of non-payment is lowered because no one wants to reduce their rating. So this city, if they're having financial problems, they will take part of the rainy day fund to pay their bond principal and interest on time. So having a healthy rainy day fund helps us a great deal in the rating agency view. So we have 72.4, but as we recommended, we're looking at a $4 million drawdown. So therefore, when we get to fiscal year end 22 this year, the accountants will say, we must reduce your 72.4 million from last year by that 4 million that you are assigning as a budget bridging amount. So that's why we put it at 68.4. Now we budget for a balance of revenues and expenditures so that fund balance will not change. That is why I assume the 68.4 will persist to 68.4 at the end of 23. Let's look at the ratios of the rainy day fund to the expenses. It was 16% in 2018. It went up to 20%, back down to 16, 19. We're looking at 17.2 at the end of 22. And even though the rainy day fund stays the same, that's the numerator, the budget total expenditures is going up from 397 to 412. So when we divide 68 into 397, it's 17%. 68.4 into 412 is 16.6%. So that is more in line with our policy, which has a cap of 15%. I would always advocate, in other parts of the country, the rating analysts have told me that governments uniformly have 40, 50%, sometimes 75%. The state of California added billions to their rainy day fund, and they don't have a 15% cap. In New England, for some reason, they see caps in the 15 to 20% range. I feel this is why we got through COVID so well. We had no layoffs, we had no furloughs, We were able to collect all our money. Part of it is having this cushion and flexibility. How the tax levy translates into mill rates. We start with the amount of local spending, 216.3 for this Board of Ed. City side, 196.15. We have 412 million in local expenditures. So if you think about it, we have to raise taxes to pay for that $412 million. In fact, we have to raise even more money because we have a section called tax adjustments, where we get benefits for elderly tax relief, other programs, and tax appeals. We're not going to collect the money on those amounts. Therefore, when we make that adjustment, we also have an adjustment for the reserve for uncollected taxes, as Lisa alluded to earlier. So we're going to send out a certain amount of tax bills, but we know there's a percentage, a small percentage compared to other jurisdictions, but a small percentage of 1.4%, which is several million dollars. So therefore, we must gross up the tax bills in order to collect enough to have a balanced budget. So that amount, the 412.4 million combined with those adjustments gets us to something we call the gross tax levy of $421 million. If we stop there, we would have to take that 421 and figure out how we're going to raise the money. However, we have revenues. We have other tax revenues, back taxes, supplemental auto, and we have non-tax revenue. We have the fees and penalties that we charge in the departments, but the largest amount by far is our intergovernmental revenues. That's where we get our state grants. And so when we deduct the amount of those revenue flows, we also add the $4 million drawdown from the rainy day fund. If we're going to get that money from the rainy day fund, we can reduce it from the amount that we need to get it from our taxpayers. When I finish with those adjustments, we have what we call the net tax levy. That net tax levy under this current recommended budget is $365.7 million. Now, there's one last wrinkle. Not everyone in the 6 districts get the same services, okay? Fire service is only given to the 1st through 5th districts. We also have garbage services. Garbage services are only provided to the 1st through 4th districts. The 5th says no garbage. We also have lighting services that are provided to the 4th and 5th districts. So what we do is we take the amount of money to provide for those services and we allocate them separately to the districts that get those services. So we have a core mill rate for the basics, and then each district gets a charge based on whether they are getting the fire, garbage, or lighting. And the 6th district has an extra charge for the services that the 6th district provides to them. And we collect that tax for them. At the bottom line, we end up with a mill rate, which says, how much money of cost are we providing to this district? And we compare it to the grand list for that district. And we divide and we get a certain mill rate. Since the 1st, 2nd, 3rd all get the same services, that core rate is 23.968 last year. The 4th was 24.054, 5th, 23.621, 6th, 22.166. This year recommendation, the numbers are 24.7 for the first 3, 24.878, 24.768, 23.673. The change, the increase over last year in mills goes from 0.76 up to 114 and 15, and the percent increase from 3.2% up to 6.8. That's how we get the mill rates. Then to get the average tax bill, we say, what is the average median home value? From statistics, median is the amount, if you listed from highest to lowest, It's the one in the middle. 50% of the houses have a value higher and 50% have a value lower. We take the amount of the mill rate and we multiply it by that median home value and we get an average tax bill. Last year, 5756, 5451, all the way up to the 6th district. This year, 5939 up to 18,000. The dollar increase goes from 173 up to the 6th district. And then the percent increase is the same as the mill rate amount. It's 3.18% in the first 3 districts, going up 3424866.8. That's how we calculate it. Let me finish up and answer questions. So in conclusion, we think this budget is balanced. It's fair. It shows fiscal restraint. It's affordable for Norwalk single family owners. But as the mayor says, we're just at the beginning of the process. It goes through your good selves, the council, and the Board of Estimate and Taxation. And we're all working together to come up with a system that works for everyone. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them now.
Thank you, Henry, for taking us through that again. Do we have questions from any members of the Finance Committee? Yes, Jen McMurray. Yes.
I guess I'll start. I have several questions, but I'll just start with one. Henry, thank you for putting this together and taking us through this so thoughtfully. I really do appreciate it. I feel like you have a way with explaining these things that can otherwise be very complicated. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You had mentioned the in-kind services performed by the city for the BOE. Could you give us some examples of that outside of the debt service that you mentioned?
Sure. We process the payroll for both sides of the shop. We pay bills, accounts payable. Our legal department provides services to help them when they have litigation. The IT department spends a lot of time helping the Board of Ed. So what happens is, based on state Department of Education mandates, we accumulate all of those shared services. Chitsame pulls it together based on our budget and based on our understanding of each department and how they allocate their services to the Board of Ed. We compile it and it's filed with the state. You could look at the numbers. We have them. There's an argument to be made that we should bill the Board of Ed and that they should request it as part of their budget every year to make it more transparent and not misleading. Right now, it looks like the Board of Ed is spending less and the city is spending more. I just feel it's just an inefficient waste of time to change the perspectives when once a year I could show what's really being spent on each side. The problem is the press often just takes the headlines of, here's what they asked for, here's what we're spending, and it's misleading.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilperson Nicole Ayers. Nicole, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Councilperson Greg and Henry. I just have a question. I just want to make sure that my understanding is clear. When you were speaking about the funding money, the rainy day money,
yes.
Is my understanding correct, or what I heard was that we are you're making the recommendation to liquidate a certain amount of money? Is that money to not raise taxes at all? Or is that money just to keep what we have to raise low?
The second, okay. As you could see, let me just share my screen again. Here we go. If you can see, the mill rate has increased 3.2% up to 6.8%. The tax bills have increased by 3.18 and up to 6.8. The $4 million made those rates lower. So it partially offset some of the increases. Last year, with the ARPA money, we used 13 million to totally offset the increase. This year, we're using 7 million of the ARPA money plus 4 million of a drawdown of the fund balance to make these increases as small as possible.
Okay, thank you. And my second question, thank you for the clarity. My second question is around the increase in the previous budget. So if my understanding is correct, the city had an increase of how much last budget?
I don't recall whatever the increases were, they were totally offset by that 13 million of ARPA money. So
But there was,
that is why, excuse me, that is why the Board of Ed was flat funded. The council decided, since we're using the ARPA money, they flat funded the Board of Ed, and whatever increases were involved were totally offset by the $13 million.
okay, but there was an increase. We just don't know what that percentage was.
I don't have it in handy, no.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Henry, on the same topic of the fund balance, the recommendation is to draw down $4 million. What is your thoughts around making that 10 million, 20 million? What's the impact of drawing down more?
The impact is that it's a rainy day fund, just like we all have in our personal lives for unexpected occurrences and to give us flexibility. As I explained, the rating agencies view that very favorably. I've mentioned when I issued my transmittal letter for the capital budget that I'm very concerned that in addition to whatever gets approved for this year, we have 220 million of approved capital budget projects that have not been borrowed yet. So when they assess our performance, what they're looking at is how much of a rainy day fund do you have? And they view very disfavorably the use of the rainy day fund just to fill a budget gap to lower taxes. That's not really what its primary purpose is. Its primary purpose is for a catastrophe. You had Hurricane Sandy, you had COVID, you have the loss of a major employer. All of those events is where you pull down from a rainy day fund to supplement what's going on. You might be helping individuals and businesses. You might have extra expenses like we did with COVID. If we didn't have all that federal money, we would have had to use our rainy day fund to supplement the expenditures in our budget. Now, if you pull down 10, 20, $30 million, as a financial professional, I would say that's very hazardous. You're taking a rainy day fund, which took 5 or 10 years to build up. You're using it just to make things better for the taxpayers today. And it's not based on a catastrophe. It's just based politically because you don't want to raise taxes a certain amount. And the rating agency will look at that, and they'll look at our debt ratios. They'll look at our the debt service to the total expenses and say, you're going the wrong way. When I came here, we had a AAA bond rating. We had the largest rainy day fund in the state, and the finances that I inherited were managed very conservatively. I'm trying to continue that and to impress upon the rating agencies that we're balancing things. We're making investments, but at the same time, we have taxpayers who are contributing tax increases that are reasonable, but at the same time, especially on the capital side, we can't get everything that we want short term, and we try to space it out. So I would say, I will tell you, remember, this is a joint mayor and CFO recommended operating budget. So the 4 million drawdown was a joint recommendation of the mayor and me. I would, if anything, go the other way and say we should draw down less. Okay, so when you ask my perspective, I'm against it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions? Jen, you had another one? Sure.
Yes, I'm sorry. I have several and I'll try to sprinkle them throughout to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. I don't want to dominate anything. Going back to the efficiency study, I'm curious, and I know none of us have a crystal ball to see into the future of what this will show, but if the efficiency study does happen to come back and say that we have potentially underfunded the BOE or the city side for that matter, I feel like we have been very conservative, and I'm wondering sort of what your thoughts are if it does happen to come back that way. I'm sure you'll speak to it more when we have the report, but I'm just sort of wondering what the plan is if they do happen to come back and say that we're not funding things enough or we're not making investments in our city and our schools enough.
Jen, can you clarify when you said we have been conservative? Do you mean that we have not been spending enough?
No. I used conservative as a term that you had just used, that you're being conservative and smart with our spending. And so I'm not insinuating that at all. I'm just asking financially, correct?
Conservative financially.
Yes.
What I would say is the following. When I first got here, we did a joint cybersecurity review of our IT departments, both the city and the Board of Ed. We had Bloom Shapiro come in because the bad guys don't care which side they're coming in. We want to make sure that everything is solid. And we were pretty solid. And both sides had recommendations to improve, which we have implemented. Right after that, I asked them for an evaluation of the IT department. Are we doing what we should be doing? Are we staffed properly, organized properly? And what came back is that we should be adding staff in certain very select areas. But it was a program of adding 4 people, let's say over a 4-year period. So the first was to get a chief information security officer, a CISO. Okay, Joyce has a very large amount of things on her plate. And cybersecurity, some days is number 2, some days it's number 12. A CISO has cybersecurity as their number 1 priority. That was the first one. Then they mentioned some other things, network support, et cetera. So we've been working on that. And that's why when I mentioned the increase in the finance group, that IT is adding people. We also have had turnover. Okay, we've lost GIS people, very important to get people. So when they say you need to invest more, I say, fine, over a 3 to 5 year period, let's figure out how we can afford it. Similarly, on the capital side, my feeling is we may want to work backwards. We take our budget. Okay, I'm going to compare it to a personal budget. How much can we afford? Okay, I'm making X thousands of dollars. We can't afford much. My spouse goes out and they make some money. Now we have a little bit more to spend. We still can't get everything that we want. So we look at how much we have to pay in taxes, what do we have left, and how do we allocate the money? It might be for our children. It might be for saving for their college. It might be for retirement. And we may not be able to fund it this year. It may take 5 to 10 years. Similarly, I think the city might want to go backwards and say, how much can we afford to increase taxes? Okay, now, if we increase taxes by that much, how much goes to the Board of Ed? How much goes to the city? Now let's take the city budget. We have certain requirements. We have increases in salaries. We have step increases. We have contracts with increases. So you take away those that are not discretionary and you say, okay, how much do I have left? How much debt service can I afford to have in order to live within my means, which might be a 4% tax increase? Well, if I only have that much of an increase in my debt service, how much debt can I add? Well, at 1.75%, which we got 18 months ago, and at 2%, which we got last summer, that's a lot more than the 2.75 or 3% I think we may be faced this summer. When the rate is higher, we can't borrow as much to get the same debt service. And then you say, okay, we can add, let's pick a number, $40 million. Okay, which of the $220 million in projects and our current 39 million are we going to fund? The problem is I see such a big gap between wanting to keep our tax increase is reasonable, how that translates into how much we can get into debt service and the mountain of debt I'm facing to borrow while interest rates are going up. I'm reading the Bond Buyer every day today, this week. The Bond Buyer is the industry newspaper for tax exempt bonds. Most predictions are now there will be 5 interest rate increases by the Federal Reserve this year. Most 0.25% each, one might be 0.5%. That's 1.5% in the year. We tend to borrow in the summer, so maybe we could get away with a 75 basis point increase. So last summer was 2, maybe we could get away with 2.75. But I'm just, I took some math that was called operations research. And what happens is you take equations with different kinds of constraints, and you could do it algebraically or geometrically, and then you can find the optimal solution. I see the restraints and constraints so close that there's not a lot we can play with. And that's my real challenge.
Councilperson Nora Najelski-Eichner.
Thank you, Chair Burnett. So Henry, I want to go back to something you said just a few minutes ago to try to understand a little bit better what we do and don't know about this question. So you talked about the question of what kind of tax increases the city can bear. Right. And I agree that I think that is the fundamental question. What is a fair tax rate? What kind of increases can we handle? Because from my perspective, a key thing that makes Norwalk is that this is a city that working families can buy homes in, right? What makes Norwalk is that we are really sort of the last bastion of affordability in Fairfield County, and we need to protect that. That is certainly a priority. That said, when I look at the numbers, people, for the most part, their taxes are collected through their mortgage company monthly. So I think that a fair question is to look at what is the monthly increase that we're proposing. What is it realistically going to mean for people's budgets to approve this kind of an increase? And when I do that math, again, using your document, I get that the median home value fourth taxing district increase with the current proposal, which you tag at $164 overall for the year. So I get that to be $13 a month that we're asking people to increase. Am I correct in that?
Yes, if it's 100 and let me go to the page.
So my question really is then, what evidence do we have? What studies have we done? What information do we have on what in fact is a bearable increase for homeowners at that $275,000 median home value? $13 a month seems like a pretty reasonable request to me. And I quite frankly suspect, so if we took the Board of Ed up to the 4.5% they'd originally asked for, by my calculations, that's an additional $1 a month. We're asking people for $14 a month. That also seems pretty bearable to me. But I do want to know, and I want to understand, what the city's research is to back the question of what point does it become unbearable? What can we ask of people? What is reasonable? Have we done research on that? Do we have data and information on where we drive people out of the city and where in fact we're just offering them better services for a level of spending they can afford and feel comfortable with? So do you have any information or data on that we could use in helping our decisions?
Henry, let me ask, the original ask of the BOE was not 4.5%. It was 9.1, I believe. Am I correct?
Yes.
So
sorry, the number, my apologies, Mayor, the 4.5% was the number that they had put out originally earlier in the year, which was their ask to cover what they saw as the needed increases for this year, minus any coverage for the ESSER funding. So I was looking at that 4.5% in terms of their initial ask. I do recognize that they came back with a 9.1 and that Henry did calculate those numbers. And when you do that math, at the 9.1 increase, you get $31 a month, which is a great deal larger than $13 or $14 a month. So I'm trying to understand that question of whether $31 a month is also too much to ask or not. And I want to know what data we have to help us in that decision-making process.
I think one of the relevant things that no one talks about is that the budget is 204 million, it was 208 million, and the Board of Ed spent 299 million. Where's all the money going? They request, where do they spend the money? They don't tell us. And if I look at the results based on what I read in Nancy on Norwalk, more than half of the students do not read, do math, or do science at grade level. So I think the real question is, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars every year in the operating budget. We're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade all the schools, but more than half of the children are not doing work at grade level. So when you talk about what are homeowners and taxpayers willing to pay, I think the relationship of what the results are in the school should be related to the investment. In finance, we look at return on investment. I don't care whether it's $100,000 or 10 million. If I'm going to spend any amount of money and I don't get a return that's valuable to the city, I say no. The mayor has gone over and over and said, why do you need a new truck, a new car? I don't want to hear end of life. It still works. That's why we're spending 12 to 15 million on flood mitigation, because that will clearly enhance the value of each homeowner and the neighborhoods in the city as a whole. But when they're spending 300 million and they're asking for 9% increase, I'd like to say, why do you need so much? And let me just add one more point. This is the
Mr. Deckwitz, though, can I stop you there? With all due respect, that is not your job. Your job is as the CFO of the city to provide us with information and data, but that is a policy decision that you are stating there. That is a perspective that is up to the Board of Ed as the elected officials in the city in terms of what they think the school district needs, and up to the council and ultimately to the BET. That is not your job to make that policy decision. I personally, based on my policy expertise and my role as a citizen in the city, think that our students are underperforming from your perspective because we have not invested enough. We need reading intervention specialists, for instance, which is a proven intervention strategy that is expensive, but it works. So again, I appreciate your perspective, but again, with all due respect, that is not your decision to make. Our request for you is for the data and the information as to where the city's budget is. Whether you think the school district is or is not doing its job is really not your job.
Well, with all due respect, I've been here 3 years, and the council and the Board of Estimate and Taxation have said, we don't know where the money goes. And that is why Evergreen Solutions was hired to analyze the efficiency of the public schools, especially in comparison to other school districts.
And I think the council is looking forward with great enthusiasm to getting that study. But since we have not seen that study, I can't make any decisions on the basis of that study.
Excuse me, I didn't finish my thought. My point is that up until now and continuing, the information the council and the Board of Estimate gets is not sufficient to make a good decision. When we give $200 million and they spend $300 million and we don't know how it's spent and allocated, then it's hard to make a good decision. That's why the decision was made to get an efficiency study. And I am not advocating any policies. My role is to offer the best information I can so that all of you good people and the full council and the BET can make the best decisions you want.
I agree, and I appreciate that information. I appreciate all the information and work that went into this, and that's fine. And I'm asking for additional information, if possible, on exactly that question of, again, what is a reasonable tax rate that is bearable for people at the median home value in the fourth, or the first through the fourth taxing district. That was my question. If it's not information we have, then that's fine. It's a question we can explore in a further time. But I was just wondering if we did have that information to help us with our decision making.
Understand, and I do not have that information.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have any additional questions? Yes. Councilperson Jen.
So I was just curious, and I think you had said that you didn't have this information in front of you, but maybe you can get it to us if possible. I know that the schools were flat funded last year, but the city did get an increase, correct, on the operating side? Okay, so I guess my question is, it's a comment / question. I'm so happy that we are able to use the ARPA funds for our city to put towards flood mitigation and things that are really going to improve our infrastructure in our city. And I'm so glad and thankful for that. I guess my problem / question is that the schools were not given that opportunity. They were using the ESSER funds to run as an operating budget. And I know there are extra funds on top of that we've discussed. But we looked at those ESSER funds to think as parents and taxpayers that those funds were going to go towards one-time expenses like extra social workers, extra counselors, extra psychologists. And instead it was used to pay for their contractual increases. And so I guess what I'm asking is, because we flat funded them last year and we're looking at a 3.75% increase this year, I feel like we're maybe putting a little bit of a Band-Aid on this, and those funds are going to run out, but those funds are not being used for what we intended them to be, I think. And I'm going to ask all those questions too. I've been asking a lot of tough questions on the BOE side, Mr. Dakowitz. I appreciate that. And I respect where you're coming from. And I want answers to those questions as well. I just feel like we are playing a little bit of a catch up, especially during COVID when it comes to schools. And this is a personal issue for me because I do have 2 children in the schools. One is special needs. And I think all of us can agree that it is a good investment for our city to make in our education system. And I think there are some places that need to be improved across the board, but I don't think that making them use ESSER funds for operating last year was probably the best option for them. I feel like it puts us at a little bit of a deficit this year.
Let me jump in here, Henry. Jen, you're right, spot on. During the administration my administration, we have given historically higher increases and higher funding of the Board of Education. The problem runs with the ESSER funds. If they use the ESSER funds for recurring expenses, let's say that they use the ESSER funds last year for $15 million, this current year, of $15 million of recurring expenses. When those ESSER funds run out, the city is expected to now take on that expense. And if they use another $15 million or $10 million this year, so that would be $25 million that now has increased the Board of Education budget to a point where the city is now expected to take on that added expense. That becomes our minimum budget requirement from that point on. So now that's a recurring expense forever. So we have to try to figure out how to use those funds for one-time expenses so that it doesn't become a minimum budget requirement for years and years to come. It's a challenge. And we understand the need to fund the Board of Education. We understand that. We understand that young students now have kind of even regressed in their learning because of the online and the distance learning that we've seen. So it's not an easy calculation. It's not an easy formula. And as I mentioned earlier on, it's also critical that we don't force people out of the city of Norwalk because they can't afford to live here because of taxes. We have senior citizens that have paid off their mortgage and their taxes now are higher than their income. And we have to be concerned about that. It's not easy. Nobody understands more than me and my team how important it is to fund our students, to invest in our students, and to make sure that our school system is giving a world-class education to everybody. We understand that. But there's also another side of that equation where we have to understand that other people don't feel the same way. This is still a work in progress. Can we increase the Board of Education side based on some of the things we're looking at? Perhaps we can. And if we can, we definitely will.
Thank you, Mayor. I really appreciate that.
Okay. Oh, okay. So let's see. I see Councilmember Tom Keegan, and I also see Councilmember Heidi Altman. I think Heidi, your hand was up first. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Chairman Burnett. I have a couple of questions, and I will try to be brief, and I appreciate everybody's time tonight. My one question, I want to make sure that I'm accurate. I believe it was in 2019 that we became a sanctuary city. Is that correct?
Heidi, there is no such thing or no definition of a sanctuary city. The city of Norwalk is a Title IV city based on Governor Malloy's issuance of a Title IV, where the city of Norwalk and other cities within the state of Connecticut do not work with or contact ICE based on the person's status.
Okay.
What we do is if ICE comes in with a civil warrant for a person within our city, we work with them to help them find that person, but we also go with them to make sure that the person they're taking into custody is safe and that they are safe. That's all we do. We do not aggressively work with ICE or search out people who are in our city undocumented.
Okay. And I mean, just to be clear, I'm in full support of that, right? Like I am proud that our city takes that stance, and I'm a big advocate of it. The reason I'm bringing that up is because in Norwalk, we do have a high percentage of MLL families and special needs students. So to Mr. Dakowitz's point, I don't think he's inaccurate, right? We have a lot of students that do not read at their level. I do not think that is through the fault of the Board of Education or our teachers or the plans from different superintendents over the years. So I'm wondering how that plays in. As far as I understand, these kinds of students require more funding. They need more services and more help. And from what I've seen in my daughter's classroom last year, there was a child that came in not speaking a word of English, and now we have conversations, which is really sweet to me. But I think it actually speaks to how well they are doing in our schools, but it's extremely demanding work. And it's why I think to Nora's point, if it was $13 or $14 a month, I do not think that's too much to ask, but this is not my specialty. So it is why we have the CFO, right, to tell us what our city can withstand. But I do agree with Nora that I think it's also why we have a superintendent to tell us what the schools need, right? Mr. Dakowitz's job is to tell us what the city needs, what the city can withstand. And Dr. Estrella's job is to tell us what the schools need and what the students can stand and what will be damaging if they go without. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Councilperson Tom Keegan.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett. Henry, on the subject of healthcare and the cost of healthcare, you indicated last year as well as this year that our consultant tends to start on the high side and then makes adjustments along the way. Do we find that the Board of Education's consultant acts in the same fashion, starts on the high side?
We share the same consultant, Tom. This consultant not only consults the Board of Ed and us, but they also consult the state of Connecticut, which is the plan we're in, the Connecticut 2.0 plan. So she has the best knowledge, And what happens is month by month, she gets better data and information.
And the only reason I ask is I'm on the same plan as well, Henry, Connecticut 2.0. I've been on it for a long, long time.
Yes.
I made the comment last year that I thought that the estimate of benefits by Mr. Hamilton was way higher than I was expecting in my own costs. And so I was wondering, has our consultant give a more realistic idea of what the employees are going to pay?
I think what happened was there were estimates that were given. We on the city side discounted them a little bit because it was early in the budget season, and Tom did not. He took that number, and then there were additional insurance expenses, and that's why he had a large number. And when it came in lower, and he said to us, won't you have to discount your health insurance? I said, no, we already used a lower number than what she quoted. So it was just a question of budgeting technique, but we now have a better understanding of what those projected numbers are and where we are in the budget season.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Keep up the good work.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Henry, question to you. Last year, I mean, the comments been made this evening that the city received an increase in the budget. But if I'm correct, we offset that increase by using ARPA money. And at the end of the day, we did not have a tax increase. Can you expand upon that some?
Well, what happened was, I recall that I had recommended a 2% increase for the Board of Ed, and we had a certain increase for the city. And changes were made. Ultimately, the amounts that were decided were flat for the Board of Ed. And if I recall, there was something like 6% on the city side. We had gotten a lot less. And remember, the Board of Ed gets more than we do. So if both sides got the same percentage increase, the Board of Ed would get more dollars than we do because they're working off a bigger base. And what happened was we looked at what the total increase was, and we offset it with the ARPA money and said, yes, we are increasing some budget line expenses, whether they were departments in the city, whether they were health insurance, whether they were debt service. And we just said, we're going to use the ARPA money to offset that. It's allowable use. We thought it would benefit all the taxpayers in the city, and we thought that was a good use of the money.
Thank you. Councilperson Nicole Ayers.
Thank you so much, Chairman Burnett. Mr. Dashowitz, I have an additional question. It's a little outside of the presentation that you gave tonight, but it is about the Recreation and Parks Department of our city. It is my understanding that they did make a request, and it's a request that I support for additional employees to help with the maintenance of city fields and parks. And as the mayor stated in the beginning of your presentation, that we are in the process of working this document. And I did some very surface research and found out that our Recreation and Parks Department is quite small compared to the number of people in our city and actually the number of people who use our facilities and our parks and all of these things. And so I would really strongly recommend if you could please reconsider adding some more funding to recreations and parks to help with the maintenance and upkeep of our parks. A large complaint that many of us receive from our constituents is about the cleanliness of our parks. And I do believe that that is such a precious part of our city. A well-deserved part of our city is for us to have clean parks, but it's very hard to keep clean parks with such a lean allocation to that department. So I really want to recommend, this is more of a comment than a question, if you could please allocate some more money for us to hire some more staff in the Recreation and Parks Department.
Well,
Henry, let me answer that.
Sure.
Thank you, Ms. Ayers. There are several ways that we're looking at how we can accomplish that. One, we've looked at allowing them to hire some part-time staffers from April until October or November in order to work directly on the fields and other things that we need to work on. The other thing I've just been working on or looking at is, can we increase the Recreation and Parks budget for overtime hires rather than bringing on new full-time employees? A full-time employee includes not only their salary, but includes their benefits, and it increases by at least 30 or 40% the amount that it costs for them to be hired. So we're looking at a lot of different ways. We recognize the problem, and we're looking at how we can best help the Recreation and Parks Department bring those parks up to standard and keep them clean, and also prepare the fields for when we have Little League games, softball games, and other types of games. So we're well aware of the problem, and we're trying to work on it so we can help them out.
Thank you, Mayor Rilling. Any additional questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's John. I have a question, if you don't mind, please.
Yes.
Henry, you brought up something about return on investment, and I just wanted to ask you a question. I know as a parent, I've seen a lot of initiatives over the, half dozen superintendents I've seen come and go over the years, and I've seen a lot of strategic operating plans and initiatives brought into the schools over the years, and I've also seen them come and go, and not always because of their success. Do you have any information or data that you've accumulated over the years that shows what initiatives are still active, which ones are no longer? I guess basically, kind of an idea of, what's still being financed and what's, not.
John, I have to tell you that I don't view that as my purview. I helped develop a budget. I let the council and the Board of Estimate make their decisions, and then I implement it. I don't supervise them operationally, but I believe that the efficiency consultant might have looked at that and may have something to comment. But I view that as the schools do their programs and the Board of Ed is who they're accountable for. And if you want to get that information, you might have to request it from them. I don't monitor that or have any of that information. I'm sorry.
Okay, I know this is, I seem to say it a lot, and it seems to fall on deaf ears, but after doing this as long as I have, and having 2 kids in the school system and being as involved as I am, I've realized that, there are a lot of things that we financed over the year, which, of course, all sound great at the time, but for some reason, he failed or are no longer in place after, and I guess the next person steps up to the plate. So, okay, I'll pursue that. I'll make that request to the Board of that. Hopefully I can get some additional information and specifics. Thank you, Henry.
You're welcome.
Do you have any additional questions at this time?
I just have one quick question, and I'm not sure, since you said you've only been doing it a few years. When Hurricane Sandy happened, one of the catastrophes you mentioned, could anybody speak to how much money we withdrew from the rainy day fund on occasions like that?
I don't have that information. I know that we got quite a bit of reimbursement from FEMA, but I don't know exactly how much we took out of the rainy day fund and what the requirements were, how much we needed. No, I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions? And again, if we don't have any additional questions, this is not the last time that we will have an opportunity to discuss the budget. We will have a public hearing next Thursday, where members of the public can comment on the operating budget before we convene a special meeting to make a recommendation on the cap. And again, the cap is just setting a high watermark in terms of the budget amount. It's not specifically defining where that money should go. That would take place at the next step when the BET conducts their department by department review with to determine the total makeup of the budget. So, so we will have another opportunity to discuss the budget next week. We have a public hearing. I believe we're also planning a joint meeting with the Board of Education, the full council, the full Board of Education for next Tuesday. So several opportunities for continual dialogue before we come to get to the point of having an approved budget. So, so are there any additional questions at this point? If not, we can move towards adjournment. Councilmember David Hooverman.
Thank you, Chairman Burnett. I just, something was said earlier, and I want to address it briefly. Henry, you said the council flatlined the Board of Ed last year. The council actually didn't flatline the Board of Ed. The council made a recommendation on the cap, and there was a vote on the cap. And this is a structural thing that I think that we need to talk about, or just at least say it again out loud, what Chairman Burnett just said. The council sets a cap. We say this is the bucket. The BET sits back and looks at it department by department and allocates where the smaller buckets. And then it comes back to the council. And if their recommendation is below the cap that we set, we're done. If their recommendation is above that cap, we go through another process to vote on whether we're going to increase that cap or not. So just so you know, and last year there was a lot of back and forth about where that cap was going to sit, and there was your recommendation. There was then a resolution that came forward that lowered that cap, and a vote that happened, which there were some who voted against it and some who voted for it. And it eventually carried. But I just want to say that the council itself, we unfortunately statutorily we don't make those choices.
Right.
And so that everyone understands that we do not make that choice. We make the choice of how much money the city will spend in the next fiscal year.
You're absolutely right, David, and I apologize for misspeaking in any way. Let's go back to the rules of the budget process for the operating budget. The Common Council sets a cap, a ceiling on the total amount of money. We were talking earlier today in the $421 million range. The council says, yes, 421 million is what was recommended. Last year, they said, I want to cut it a little bit. There was a vote. It was not unanimous, but the vote carried less than my recommendation. It then goes to the Board of Estimate, and I wanted to go back to your comment, Nicole. I don't have any further say in this. I made my recommendation. However, when that cap goes to the Board of Estimate, every department has a chance to talk to the BET, and they can make their case. And they can say, we feel we need more than what was recommended. We feel we should get more than based on the cap. And it is in the BET's hands to allocate the money to different departments as they see fit. As David just indicated, if they feel that the departments should get more money, then it goes back to the council, and the council has a choice. Do we revise our cap upward to agree, or do we stick with our cap? And then it goes back to the BET. If the BET's recommendation is above the cap, then they have to determine where the cuts are to get to that cap. But they are allowed to shift monies from department to department. And then at the end of the day, it's the Board of Estimate that sets the mill rate and the taxes. So I apologize if I wasn't precise enough, but that's the process and those are the responsibilities of the different parts of government here in Norwalk.
Thank you, Henry. I appreciate that. I have one last thing that I would like to say. It sort of builds on something that Councilman Keides said earlier, and that is that, and this is something that I'm starting to wrestle with, and that is the different programs that do come forth. And this is not anything that I'm asking you, Henry, because this is not your purview. But those programs that do come forth when a program is changed in the school system, how that money is absorbed and moved. And in my tenure here on the council, I have asked this question and I have not gotten an answer. And that is something that I hope is revealed in some way through this efficiency study, because I look at that because each year, as we've talked about, we cannot give less than we gave the year before. Yes. Do we want to fund the schools? Absolutely. Do we want the best schools in Connecticut? Absolutely. But I question when a program that 8 years ago was funded at a few $1 million program, and then it is gone 2 years later and there's something new in its place. What happened to that $2 or $3 million? Because that same year there was a request for another $6 million increase in the budget. And those are questions that I have asked and not gotten. And so I'm saying right now to my colleagues on the Board of Ed that if we are able to have this meeting next week, that we can ask some of these questions and perhaps get some of these answers. Thank you.
Okay. At this point, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, thank you, Councilperson Diana Revelous. All those in favor, show by the sign of aye. All those opposed have the same right. Motion carries. So we stand adjourned. Thank you, Henry, for your presentation and information as it relates to the questions. And have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you very much for your time.
Good night.
Good night.
All right, thank you, Henry.
Thank you. Good night.